Welcome to our weekly player series webinar. This is Key Qualities of a U.S. Soccer Player Part 3. My name is Coach Mignone of West Orange United FC, and I hope that everybody is safe and well during this period of quarantine due to COVID-19. Being away from teammates, coaches, schoolmates, teachers, and the normal day-to-day things that occur within our lives sometimes places us at a bit of a disadvantage. However, during this period, we can reinvent ways of experiencing the game on our own and utilizing this time to reflect upon what we do well, what are our strengths, what are some areas of needed improvement, and designing action steps to address these areas so that we can get better at this game and how we perform within our roles and functions within the game for attacking and defending. And the opportunity as well to spend really high quality time with our family and loved ones within our homes, and know that we will be back together with our teammates, and we look forward to that time when that occurs. However, until then, we make the best of this time period with individual training opportunities, such as this one on Zoom. So we remind you that each week we get together with Zoom webinars. They're 30 minutes long each Thursday, 4 o'clock p.m. for players, and 7 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday evenings for parents. So we look forward to seeing and speaking with everyone on those live presentations. However, for those of us that are unable to make these presentations, I will record them and put them onto YouTube so that everyone can be informed and understand what we're speaking about during each of these meetings. So we begin by looking back. This picture was taken in the mid-90s. These are West Orange United FC players, and this was a time period when these girls were experiencing the joys of game-like training sessions. They were provided plenty of opportunities within the flow of the game to make their own decisions based upon what they were reading and understanding, as we described in an earlier presentation. And it is through an environment like this that players are able to develop the skill of being an independent, critical thinker. This skill goes way beyond the game of soccer, and these girls, now women, have gone on to lead very professional lives in their chosen careers. Some are moms, some of whom are even still involved as in the game as coaches. So it's a great memory to look back upon, and reflecting upon these days allows me to realize that these girls were developing critical thinking skills within the environment where I, as a coach, took a step back, observed their training sessions, adapted them to make sure that everyone was challenged in each training session, and instead of providing commands, I asked questions to stimulate thought on their part and allowed them to problem solve on their own. So a cool memory, and this is a happy memory looking back at older days at West Orange United FC, and we are making wonderful memories at this time as well. So when we think about the qualities of a world-class player, we discussed this on previous webinars. Here we look at Andres Iniesta. At the time, he was playing for Barcelona, a playmaking central midfielder. He also has represented in that same role and position the national team of Spain. When we think of Andres Iniesta, what qualities come to mind that we want to mention as far as what makes him a world-class player? Now, in our previous webinars, we heard things like being very creative, improvising, being able to pull off the unexpected, being explosive in his movements with respect to reading and recognize an opportunity to play forward and quickly exploiting that opportunity with an explosive dribble or a forward moving pass. He has an uncanny ability to control the ball under pretty much any circumstance. No matter how much pressure is on him, he's able to protect the ball and efficiently move it, usually in a forward direction, to create scoring opportunities. So these are some of the qualities of a world-class player. We can't forget about the mind of a world-class player, the very detailed ability to read. And when we say read the game, we mean read our surroundings, the movements of opponents, teammates, the ball, and how one can affect the other. The movement of the ball can affect our teammates and the opponent, and the movement of the opponent will affect the manner in which we move, and the manner in which we move will typically affect the way the opponent moves as well. So a world-class player has a very keen ability to recognize that every split second and make effective decisions that benefit his team in terms of the goal of building up, creating chances and scoring goals, or the defending goals of preventing the opponent from building up, denying their goal scoring chances and preventing them from scoring. So these are the 6 key qualities of the U.S. soccer player. We've already covered in previous webinars 1 through 4, reading and understanding the game and making decisions, taking initiative and being proactive, demonstrating focus, and optimal technical abilities. Today we're going to take a look at optimal physical abilities and taking responsibility and accountability for your own development. As we see, U.S. women's national team legend Mia Hamm in that photo. And Mia Hamm certainly epitomizes the 6 key qualities of the U.S. soccer player. So when we look at the physical demands of the game, when we're thinking about optimal physical ability, we're looking at Bayern Munich in a training session. Bayern Munich, a Bundesliga great. We see them involved in a small-sided game during this training session. And what do we think about when we want to prepare for the physical demands of a game? Do we think about going out and jogging for 5 miles at one steady pace? Does that replicate the movements in a game? Or do the movements in a game involve a lot of sudden sprinting, maybe sometimes stopping, walking, maybe sometimes jogging and then quickly changing direction on a sprint? So a lot of very explosive moments followed by almost periods of stopping or walking, and then another explosive moment, whether that be suddenly changing pace or maybe even going from an explosive moment to a moment where you stop. So the physical demands of the game include those type of movements, and the question is, how can we replicate those moments on our own to prepare for these physical demands of the game? So I mentioned the movements, and we'll build a little bit more on the movements now, but what about the power involved? So in that picture, you see a U.S. women's national team practice, and during this training session, again, involved in a small-sided game, these 2 players are struggling to gain control of that ball. And what do we see in terms of the power that's used right now? So we see power in their legs that are pushing their bodies to challenge the opponent. We see the upper body and the strength of the core that's used in this struggle as well. And this struggle is commonplace during every match. And these are the type of battles. They're clean. They're not dirty. That's not a foul. These are the clean battles that occur over many different situations within the game of soccer. So the kinds of power that are involve sudden explosive power, and usually this power is not maintained, or these movements, these very sudden quick movements aren't maintained over a long period of time. They're usually short bursts that last a few seconds, and then the ball is on to maybe a different location, and there might be some jogging in between or walking in between, and then sudden explosive movements and power are engaged within the game of soccer. So this is a player that made a certain impact, a former FIFA World Player of the Year, George Weah. And when I think of optimal physical ability, he is probably one of the first players that comes to mind. There we see him exploding through the air to meet a service ball from the flank. We see him at the top of the box, and he's looking to get on that, maybe to receive it with the inside of his foot, and then perhaps look to go to goal. So optimal physical ability involves being able to be very aware of what your bodies can do. So can our bodies change pace at any given moment? So when we think about real little children, what happens when real little children are walking and then they start running? Oftentimes they fall. They have difficulty balancing sometimes, particularly on one foot when they're dribbling, and maybe one foot is touching the ball, so it's not touching the ground, and only one foot is touching the ground. Sometimes they trip on the ball and fall. So we want to demonstrate physical awareness of what our bodies can do. So as we get older, we develop what's called the ABCs: agility, balance, and coordination. And coordination is mentioned in the point underneath. So coordination has to do with being able to adjust the movements of your body based upon the movements of the ball. Agility relates to being able to change direction at pace while still maintaining control of your body. And balance has to do with much of what we do on one foot in the game of soccer. So if we look at every single person in that picture, including the referee, everybody's balancing on one foot right now. Even the player in the background behind George Weah, you can see one foot is lifted off the ground. So when we're running, at each second, we only have one foot that's making contact with the ground. Right? George Weah is balancing with no feet on the ground. He's using his arms to adjust his body weight. So our arms are very important in terms of balance, and we see players adjust their arms while striking the ball, while shooting, while passing sometimes, and certainly while running. Right? So what are some of the action steps we can employ to develop this quality of optimal physical ability? Well, maybe we can go in our yard during this COVID-19 period and train this on our own, because we know the absolute best way to address optimal physical ability is within the game environment itself, particularly in small-sided games, 3v3, 4v4, 5v5, where there's a lot of change of possession. We call that transition. And in those moments, so there's some very explosive movements during those moments where we have to quickly look to attack and quickly look to defend suddenly. But if we're not in a situation where we can play games such as now, we can certainly recreate those moments by maybe putting down some discs in our backyard, or if we don't have discs, we can use t-shirts or water bottles or or things of that nature, safe things of that nature that wouldn't harm us. So t-shirts, water bottles, a jacket, and maybe put these things down on the surface, and we can dribble through as if it was a maze and change direction and change pace using different surfaces of our feet, inside, outside, and sole. And maybe we could go at really high intensity for 30 seconds and then stop, relax, take a rest. And then maybe while we rest, we could do something called active rest. We can juggle while we rest. And then once we recover, after about another 30 seconds or a minute, we can get back at it with some really explosive high intensity movements, changing direction and pace. And that's a cool way to address this optimal physical ability. Now, how long would we do that? Well, we certainly wouldn't have to do it for very long. We would keep in mind that we would do it for a short amount of time. 30 seconds might be a little too long, maybe 20 seconds. And then our rest in between each of those explosive type of activities, our rest might be 30 seconds or a minute. And we want to make sure that we completely recover. We're not breathing heavy, we're relaxed, and then we go at it again. And so these are some ideas for addressing optimal physical ability. And what can we do on our own? We see Carly Lloyd, Jersey girl, U.S. women's national team player and captain, a past FIFA World Player of the Year twice. So she spends a lot of time on her own. She's at an indoor facility there near her home, training as she does every single day of the week. That is when she's not traveling. However, she on her own brings a bag of soccer balls with her, and she finds a place where there's a wall, and she spends a lot of time at a wall doing sometimes pretty high intensity things, striking, receiving the ball, making quick movements, striking again, the ball coming back, receiving quickly on the receiving. Her first touch prepares the next strike. She'll go at it again, and she'll do this over perhaps 30 seconds, working really, really high intensity, and then resting for 30 seconds or sometimes even a minute. And active rest often includes some juggling, as I mentioned. So in addition to that little backyard activity, we might be able to find a wall that we can strike the ball against, and do that repetitively, and focus not only on the strike against the wall, but receiving it quickly and getting the next strike off with our next touch. So ball comes off, first touch, gets it under control, and also prepares the next strike. So some cool ideas if we have a wall as well. So who determines your potential? When we think of our potential in this game, who determines how far we can go? Who determines if we could ever be a professional player or a world-class player? Well, in our webinar, we had some interesting discussions about this, and we realized that potential has nothing to do with a coach, with an adult, with a friend, or with anybody that might tell us, oh, well, you're not good enough to play here, you're not too good enough to play there. The person that determines your potential is you. So you have everything to do with how far you go in this game. So there we see a player who is spending time in that maze type of game that I described for the backyard. He's using discs, and as you can see from his movement, because his left foot is blurry, that must mean he's moving that foot pretty quickly. So he's probably using some explosive movements, as you can see, with his bent knees and bent ankles and bent waist. He's looking like he's changing direction, making a sharp cut to his left. So if we spend the time doing those things on a day-to-day basis, we can work towards what our full potential is, and only we can figure out what our full potential is. So taking accountability and responsibility for our own performance and development, This is an older picture. This is from the 80s. This is actually from 1980. This is a Belgian player called Francois van der Elst. He played for my favorite team, the New York Cosmos. And when I think about somebody that takes responsibility and accountability for his own performance and development, I had the pleasure and the opportunity as a small child to go to the daily practices of the Cosmos with my dad. And I always remembered that at the end of every training session, and these training sessions the Cosmos played through the middle of the summer, it was very hot, Francois would always stay behind after training, after his team was finished and they were going to shower and perhaps have lunch and head home. He stayed for sometimes an hour or two, striking balls against the wall at Giant Stadium. Well, now it's called MetLife Stadium. But at the time, Giant Stadium had a blue wall surrounding the field, and he would strike balls against the wall and work really hard at perfecting his strikes, his driven balls, his chipped balls, and even short passing with the inside of the foot. So Francois van der Elst also is a player that came to the Cosmos from Belgium and playing first division soccer in Europe. He came to the Cosmos as a midfielder, as a playmaking midfielder. Well, when he got to the Cosmos were filled with playmaking midfielders, players by the name of Franz Beckenbauer, Johan Neeskens, and Vladislav Bogicevic, world-class players, all central midfielders. And Francois van der Elst had to fit into a different position on the field, and he ended up playing right wing. So he played a right forward position, and he was not only engaged through every training session and match, fully engaged and fully motivated to play his best in that position. He was adaptable and flexible. So he was very willing and able to take on a different position within the team and the roles and functions that come with that position. And perhaps that was an unexpected challenge or problem that he faced, and he faced it as a professional, and he was able to be very successful with the New York Cosmos, guiding the Cosmos to a soccer bowl championship in his first year at the Cosmos. So when we mentioned delivering on agreements and promises, so if you create an action plan to work on each day to get better in an area that you've identified as a particular learning need, and you say, okay, I'm going to go out there every day and I'm going to spend 20 minutes juggling, 20 minutes dribbling, and 20 minutes striking the ball against a wall. And some days you wake up and you might be a little tired or maybe not in the mood to run around. Or maybe some days it might be raining, it's kind of nasty outside, or some days it's cold, and you say, I don't really feel like going out. And whose agreements would you be delivering upon, or whose promises would you be delivering upon if you said, you know what, I know it's cold, I'm going to put on a jacket, I'm going to tough my way through this, and I'm going to fulfill that promise I made. So you're delivering on your own agreements and promises. So whatever plan you design, we want you to stick to it and deliver on your own agreed upon ideas for development and practice. Can you articulate your own learning needs? In a previous webinar, we talked about reflection and how important reflection is, thinking back on your last performance. What were your strengths? What were some areas of need and improvement? And can we identify and really describe, that's what we mean by articulate, can we really describe specifically what those areas are that you want to improve? An example of that could be fainting right and driving left with the ball. So in other words, going 1v1 against an opponent, maybe you identified a weakness of feinting right and then using your less dominant foot, your left foot, to explode away from the opponent with. So maybe that is a really specific learning need that you've identified. So by doing that, are you able to practice that? Are you able to really focus upon that the next time you go out to train? And we want to be able to reflect. Reflection is a very important part of this key quality number 6. Every time we have an experience, whether that's a training session, whether that be a practice in your backyard on your own, or whether that be a game, we always want to reflect upon what we did well. That's really important to identify what you did well, because we still want to get better at what we do well, but we want to identify some learning needs. We want to be able to describe those learning needs really, really clearly, and then maybe use that information to create action steps that we can set out and practice upon each day afterward. So how can we build upon this key quality? Well, there's my son. He's spending some time, as we can see, the snow in the background, and he's moving around so much he uses a short sleeve shirt instead of a coat. I didn't tell him to do that, but so be it. And if anybody's familiar with Hazel Avenue School, there's a wonderful concrete wall that I spent an entire childhood in front of. And Joe is taking the opportunity that he has. Maybe that's after school. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a weekend. I don't know. But he's spending time at that wall, getting his form correctly and his body mechanics for different types of striking. And he's setting out upon his action steps to improve in specific areas. Maybe he's focusing on striking balls that are rolling away from him. Sometimes it's a little tricky to adjust body mechanics and timing of the planting foot, ideally, for balls that are either moving away from us, moving towards us, moving across the front of our body, or even bouncing or moving through the air. Each requires different types of adjustments, and the hours that we spend on our own focusing on sharpening those specific body mechanics, the more helpful that will be as we move forward in our developmental plans. So I will close by saying, if you have any questions, obviously this is a recorded webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section or reach out to me at my email, New York Cosmos, all spelled out, NEWYORKCOSMOS @verizon.net. And I hope to communicate with everyone soon on our next live webinar. Don't forget, live webinars are Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. for parents, and Thursday afternoons at 4 p.m. for players and hopefully parents as well. So we look forward to the next time. Signing out, Coach Lou from West Orange United FC.